Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of An Unconventional Guide to Success. Scott and I are excited for this season and hope you will truly enjoy our incredible lineup of guests who will share their stories and help us as we continue to explore concepts and discuss real-life examples showing that the path isn't linear and that the journey to success is self-defined. My name is Linda Misegadis.
And I'm Scott Montgomery.
And we will be your guides. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to An Unconventional Guide to Success. I'm really excited to be in the studio here today with my co-host, Scott Montgomery, and with our special guest today, Alex Chard. So welcome, you guys.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Linda.
Well, so just a little bit about Alex, and you know, this is going to be fun to really dig in a little bit more around this. Is that Alex is the head of programming and content for U.S. Public Sector Network, and I get the chance to work with the Public Sector Network, and Scott has as well with the WorldGate organization, which has been great. But the Public Sector Network is a social learning platform, and it exists to help governments around the globe to break down silos and collaborate and work together for better outcomes for citizens. And then the growing community spans really all tiers of government and public services and allows members to network, benchmark, and share best practices. But Alex is the U.S. head of content and programming, and in his role, it's to engage with leaders from across public sector, explore areas of interest and expertise, and build programming that meets their needs. And Alex gets a chance to work really closely with leaders at the local, state, territorial, tribal, and federal levels, and really provide a forum where they can share leverage and insights while really remaining engaged with their peers. So Alex has got such an interesting background, and so much of what he has to do aligns with what Scott and I have been talking about around things like relationships and partnerships, and really kind of that whole social networking and social capital. So we thought how fun it would be to have Alex come to the studio and talk about that.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll, although Scott doesn't always agree with me on my approach here, but that's okay. We'll see what he does when I ask this first question. He might totally throw you off, Alex, and say, no, that's not the question we're going to ask, Linda. So just be prepared. It could happen, but
I've already got this queued up. That's exactly what's going to happen. You go first, Linda. We'll see.
Right, we'll see what happens. So,
let's make it lively. I love it.
That's right.
It keeps me on my toes
Memorex.
too. Exactly. So, but Alex, just to kind of lighten it up a little bit, is if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live, and why would you live there?
That is a really, really good question. I've been fortunate enough to live abroad previously. I lived in France for 6 years, in Paris specifically, and that was an amazing experience. Really, kind of helped dictate and drive my worldview and kind of how I engage with people. But if I had to choose another location, completely different, I would say I'd likely move to somewhere in Asia. I don't necessarily have a location in mind.
Okay.
Maybe South Korea, maybe Vietnam. But the reason that I'm chiefly thinking about a location like that is because it would really pull me out of my comfort zone, right? I'm somebody who kind of thrives with challenges, and I really appreciate, kind of engaging with people who and cultures and perspectives that I have not had the opportunity or have had limited opportunity to kind of engage with previously in my life. And so I think it would really pull me out of my comfort zone and give me the opportunity to just learn from beginning to end all day, every day.
I love that. Yeah, well, and actually, that's a good segue into something I wanted to ask you, is because at the beginning of all of our events, you always comment and thank basically Native American, because typically we're on somebody else's land, right? And so you make a point of kind of bringing that up and introducing that, and it's subtle the way that you do it, but why do you do that? Like, why is that important to you to recognize that and to acknowledge in the various locations when when PSN has these events?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think from PSN's standpoint, right, we're as a mission-driven organization and one that is very specifically inclined to support citizens and residents across the entirety of the nation. It's really important that we are mindful and cognizant of every citizen, right? And all of the challenges that they may be facing so that we
Yeah.
can try and help address some of those concerns and hopefully try and move along the bar for those folks as well. The other component, just for me personally,
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that everybody needs to be a part of the solution, right? And that no individual, no locality, no nation has a monopoly on great ideas, right? And so it's really imperative that we're bringing everybody into the conversation because native leaders are dealing with a lot of the same challenges that other leaders are dealing with across the public sector, right?
Yeah.
They're dealing with cybersecurity challenges, they're dealing with workforce issues, they're dealing with data privacy and concerns of that nature, and so they're not going to be able to help inform for the rest of the nation if they're not involved in those conversations. So it's a first step. It is
Yeah.
by no way, in no means, shape, or form a kind of final process. It is not
Yeah.
just to kind of make that acknowledgement and let that live alone. It's really about taking that first step, building relationships, building trust with people, and then making sure that they are involved in those conversations down the line.
That's so key. I really resonate with that and what you're talking about in building relationships. What an interesting way to sort of segue into that not being a final thing in a presentation or an introduction, but rather the invitation to starting to expand that social capital. That's really impressive. That's really in theme with what we're trying to do here and just sharing with folks the dimension of relationship that matters to get things moving forward and the collective and how people aren't alone and in a silo in trying to accomplish the greater good.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Which ultimately leads to success, which is typically an unconventional path. People tend to think that they have to bear the cross of getting the work done and doing it so rigidly when really it's a collective. And starting to open that up is one of the reasons we had you on today, Alex, is because that's really an impressive concept and one that we would want to share with everyone. So thank you for bringing that.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So, Alex, talk a little bit about your journey to get where you are today. So, Scott wrote a book, how did you get here? And that was really what kind of launched us talking about all of this is that everyone has a different path and a different definition of success. And you kind of have an interesting background in like why did you decide to kind of go into what you did, and it aligns nicely with your personality for sure, because I know I connected with you immediately, and it's just like this relationship side of you that helps. But talk a little bit about like how did you get here, like why did you choose this path, and and what's important to you.
Yeah, believe it or not, I kind of stumbled into it. I think that in many ways, what I was studying at university didn't end up, while it was very interesting, and it's the type of thing that kind of keeps me guessing all the time. I studied economics and specifically macro.
Wow.
While I find it very interesting and something that I personally find a lot of joy in, writing reports was not the path for me, right?
I feel you. I feel you,
Yeah.
Alex. I'm a humanities guy. So if you're not painting a picture or giving something, love and poetry, I don't know what you're talking
Right.
about.
Yeah. And so
Sounds like that might be the opposite.
I mean, for me, it was I had to engage with people, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
having that opportunity to kind of impact conversations and the direction that those things were going, that's really what drew me to events and to collaboration and to driving as much as possible, right, getting the right people in the room so that they're making decisions and making moves that can kind of impact people down the line.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I fell into, I guess, the event space more broadly.
Yeah.
But then after that step, candidly, moving into the public sector was kind of the next step for me. And in a lot of ways, that was both driven by some mentors who I had, right, who kind of helped me understand where my skill set could best be leveraged, and how I could also find a lot of joy in that process. But in a lot of ways, it was, and I'll probably sound like a rote geriatric millennial. A lot of it was predicated in trying to help others, right, and to do something that was a little bit bigger than myself, and that working in events can be very lucrative, but at the same time, you don't necessarily get a great feeling at the end of the day because you're helping somebody else pad their bottom line. If you're helping drive actual initiatives that are going to be impacting people's lives, I think that you can walk away with your head held high.
I think I'd love to just jump in on that. That's a really important thing that you mentioned about how mentors helped you, and mentors helped guide you into your best self, as if I can paraphrase what you said. One of the things that I think will be really important for viewers and listeners to hear from you would be, how did you let those mentors in? How did you choose them? Talk to me a little bit about that relationship, because I wrote an entire chapter about that. And I think it's key that when people give you opportunity, we find ourselves respecting that opportunity by working in a place we didn't expect, i.e. economics, right? Now we're in public sector. So could you just talk to me a little bit about how you let those mentors in, or why you chose them and how that went
Sure,
down?
absolutely. I mean, part of the process for me, and I think this goes back to some of the conversation you all had the other day. One thing that really struck me, if I may, before we jump into that, one thing that really struck me was the idea of not paying a mentor for that
Yeah,
insight, right? That you all shared in a recent
right,
episode. And that's the world of a coach, right? That the mentor should just
right,
be kind of helping you and guiding you and giving you that insight to help drive you along in your process. So for me, a lot of it was finding individuals who I don't want to say necessarily had a shared worldview per se, but a lot of
right.
individuals who had, I guess, a worldview that I could attach to, right? And there were aspects to that I could absolutely
Mhm.
learn from, draw from in terms of insight and the like. But a lot of it was finding individuals where we had, at the very least, a bit of a synergy in our perspectives, right? That helped really set me up for success because engaging with those folks, whether they were coming from a university professor, right, who really just kind of took a liking to me, whether that
Mhm.
was somebody who I directly reported to, with which I've had the good fortune of having a couple of folks who not only
Yeah.
started out as managers but very kind of quickly became mentors. But
Mhm.
also just individuals who I had the opportunity to engage with more broadly. I think of a gentleman who I've been working with here actually at Public Sector Network, who's given me the opportunity to broaden my abilities, my skill sets, who's giving me additional training on some points that I never really thought I'd have the opportunity to get into outside of the context of a coach, for example.
Right.
So this is somebody who actually pulled me aside and started giving me these sorts of insights for free, right? And giving me that sort of perspective on how I can proceed with my career, next steps, and how I can basically leverage the skill sets that I've used to date or that I've built to date to
Yeah.
further my career and further the impact that I can have on others as well.
And the way you fall into that is they helped you hone in on your inherent skill set. And then you, if I may, did you feel compelled then, as that mentor gave you these opportunities, to deliver for them what could also benefit for them through your own skill set, right?
Absolutely,
Did you find yourself right? And I think that's
absolutely.
really important. And I love how you talked about university. So 22-year-olds coming out of college that don't understand, start with your professor, right? And if you've got a good boss, or you see someone at the office that you aspire to have a better view of the world from, global views from, like you said, don't be afraid to reach out to them. And I think that's really important that you hone in on those. And I'm really glad you said it the way you did, because they're everyday people in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They really are.
And you can't kind of leave it to happenstance, if you will, right? I think it's really, really important
Right.
to go out and proactively engage with people on those points. And not every person who you necessarily may want to be a mentor for you is necessarily going to be the right fit. And that person might not always have the time or the ability to do that as well, right? I think it was Charles Barkley that very famously said, "I'm not a role model," right? And so it's
Right.
right. So that sort of thing, it doesn't always align how you want it to, but you have to be open to it. You have to engage people. You have to, put yourself out there to find those opportunities. Because if you don't, candidly, you're just going to miss it, right? You're never going to have the
Ah,
chance to get that back.
Alex, thank you. Gosh, I hope our listeners are really honing in on that, because it couldn't have been said more
Pay
beautifully.
attention, kids.
Beautiful.
Pay
That's
attention.
right. I
That's right.
totally
That's
agree.
right.
No, and I think that's great, and it really is such an amazing point, and it really it ties into just what we've been talking about mentors and leadership and relationships and networking and social capital, and not being afraid to step outside your box, and that social capital isn't social media, right? Social capital
No.
is in-person connection, making those relationships, and really establishing that network of people that really are there to help lift you up and help, and that you in turn, will then turn back and
Mm.
help them when you have the
Yes.
opportunity to do that as well. Hence how we all accomplish amazing things in this world. But Alex, what would you say, like, what's your biggest failure and how did you learn from that experience?
It's, oh boy, that's a tough one. That is a tough one.
Are there any
Yeah,
failures? I mean,
maybe you're
really.
just
I'm
perfect, Alex. I mean, that was
perfect.
pretty presumptuous on my
Oh
part.
man.
Right, Linda? I mean, he is our guest. Come on now. Alex, tell us a time you weren't satisfied with your
Yeah.
results. How's
Yeah, you know what?
that?
That is every day. Oh, that is every day.
Right,
I'm never
right.
satisfied with my results. At the end of the day, I'm constantly fighting with myself for that kind of next level of improvement, right? So
Right,
that
right.
is key. I am my own worst enemy on that front. But
Isn't that
I,
true?
I would say that my most significant failure, I think, at the very least professionally,
Yeah.
at this stage, and if I'm being 100% honest with myself and with everyone, it was really poorly ending a past employment relationship.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
I had a situation a few years back whereby, um, and I'm not going to get into names or anything like that
Of
because
course. Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
not be the right way to go. But the company wasn't doing great, and I myself in the role I was not doing great.
Okay.
And there was a kind of general tension within the company that was very, very unfortunate, but at the same time, everybody, myself included, contributed to, right?
Sure.
And as things started to go worse, instead of taking it upon myself to be the better individual, and try and kind of redress a lot of those challenges and put myself more in a leadership position, and try and bring some positivity, I found that I ended up kind of pulling back a little bit, and a little bit more than I naturally do. That's not kind of my
Sure.
personality and my approach to
Yeah.
work. And so I not only felt like I let the organization down at the end of the day, because when our relationship did end, it wasn't on the best note. So I
Okay.
felt like I let them down, but at the same time, I
Sure.
also felt like I let myself down. That just was not my best self. That was not my best professional self, and that any way you look at it, I could have handled that situation significantly better. And
Sure.
one of the things that really kind of came from that, and something
Yeah.
that I really learned from it, was being much more intentional in relationships, right? And being much more intentional, very specifically with leadership who I report to, and not just the individual, but the broader whole in terms of leadership in an organization. And so I've since, in roles, spent much more time focused on managing up, right, and engaging
Yeah.
with leadership on a much more proactive, let's make positive movements here sort of basis, as opposed to saying, you know what, that doesn't fall under my purview. I'll just leave it to them. It doesn't touch me. I'll just deal with it if it comes up. So that has been I think, largely the right choice in my career, since I've kind of made that pivot, if that makes sense.
Well, and if I can paraphrase that at all, the growth edge on that would be these are the folks that have the global view you made reference to that could help you expand in your horizon and become mentors if you remain open to that. So, what an interesting segue into mentors provide value, and we have to put forth our own honoring of said relationship. And it feels like your best failure might be that you didn't honor the potential of those opportunities, and that's a good thing to note here for the next generation, young entrepreneurs or people in business. You're not doing it alone, and listen to what you're saying as it ties to the things we're reviewing today. I mean, that's fantastic. What an awareness.
Yeah.
What a lesson
Took a
too.
while to
Sorry you
get
had to
there.
go through it. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
If
and
we can help expedite it here today, that's good.
Exactly. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, that kind of goes to that whole growth mindset versus fixed mindset, right? Because I think that we can really find ourselves stuck in that fixed mindset and really can, like, this is what I do, this is my role, and no opportunity looking outside of that. And when you have the growth mindset, I think you can look beyond that and also not get caught up in the titles of everyone too, right?
Right.
Because I think that's also what stops us, right? Sometimes, like, well, he's the CEO of the company or he's the president, and so therefore I can't possibly, what could I possibly bring to the table? And recognizing that it's just a person who's worked hard and is in this position doesn't mean they're the smartest person in the room. It just means that that's the figurehead that's there. So don't be afraid to step in and say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you taken this approach? And I actually think that if we would be a little more bold in that situation, that leaders would actually, they embrace that, right? They do actually want us to do it. We've just kind of gotten caught up in this belief like, oh, well, I can't talk to them because they're the, whatever that leadership position is. So,
Absolutely. That is so well said, Linda. So well said. I think that a lot of folks tend to think, especially younger folks coming into business, right? If we're talking about students, if we're talking about folks who maybe had
yes.
a very unconventional path to getting into business or into leadership roles, oftentimes do have that concern, right? And they're really, really
Yes.
concerned about, okay, well, how can I make this? This is a major concern that I have about the direction of the company, the direction of the strategy, the direction of this project, whatever the case may be. And not feeling bold enough, as you mentioned, right, to bring that and air that out and make sure that we're addressing that preemptively. I think that's an
Yeah.
amazing point. I hope the kids are listening in, especially the students, the folks that are coming into business and picking up on that point. It's an amazing point.
Well, and if I can add to the repertoire of the folks that are actually looking at that, business owners forget that they need to do that for their clients
Yes. I'm
as
glad
well.
you said that, Scott.
So, I mean, partnering with clients, I mean, WorldGate, my firm, partners with UKG, and we're in a constant evolution of where can we provide the best value, and how do we work together more succinctly for the greater good of our customers. And it's really a fascinating dance that if you don't bring the opportunity of listening and communicating effectively,
Yes.
you're not going to get to that answer. And opportunities like the one you described being your biggest failure is exactly what's going to happen on a scale, business to business, college student to new hire.
Wow.
Right? So you've got that whole repertoire.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really important stuff. I'm really, really glad you're bringing that up. I mean, Alex, you're a godsend
Yeah.
to the next generation.
Oh, I hope
Thanks
my
for
mom's
sharing it.
listening in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and send this clip to your old employer and say, look, I didn't mean it the way it went
Yeah.
down.
That's a
Right?
good point. Yeah, that's a really,
Maybe
really
that's good energy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And to tell you the truth, though, one of the positives, I have been able to engage with some of those folks since.
Oh, that's great.
And kind of clear the air a little bit, right, and kind of reestablish some of those
Good.
relationships. So the goal is never to burn those bridges,
Wonderful.
right? If you can
Right.
rebuild them a little bit, that's always worth your time.
I had a mentor.
Linda and I've
years-
had a few.
Yeah. So I had a mentor years
Yeah.
ago who told me, Linda, if you're going to burn a bridge, you better burn it to the ground because you never know
That's right.
when you might have to cross that bridge again. And so I think I've only ever in my career ever burned one to the ground. For the most part, I have tried to do exactly what you said there, Alex, and really be able to, because it is such a small world. We think that,
Yes.
it's so big and massive and you're never going to cross paths. I have crossed paths, with more people that have been in my life through, from the beginning all the way to now. It's amazing to me. And with the advent of social media platforms like LinkedIn, you see it even more, right? And so there is an exposure concern there too, right? Because if I am, you're putting yourself out there and you're putting yourself into these platforms, and if you have not carried yourself well or presented yourself well, that can come back and really get you in your career as well, because it's like, oh well, I remember that Linda, and she wasn't really all the things that she's saying that she is, and so it is really important, I think, to maintain those positive relationships, and to your point, you don't have to burn them down. You don't have to like everyone either, but it is really important to just leave the right impression and carry yourself in that regard. So no,
Absolutely.
excellent points on that. Well, I know like relationships and partnerships are really important to your business. And so can you talk a little bit about, because especially what you do at Public Sector Network, because not only do you have to convince partners like us, right, to sponsor the events so that then they can really be a free platform for government, you also have to convince government folks that it is, that this is a good platform for them and that they should participate and be a part of these and the networking side of it. So, how do you kind of, because government can be challenging to develop relationships and convince them that they should be a part of these things.
Sure.
And so how do you, kind of leverage the relationship and partnerships that you've developed across your career?
I'd say a lot of guilt. I'm big at, just guilt tripping people until they say,
I love
no,
it.
I can't.
Good.
Yes,
I can't.
yes.
Gotta do what you got to
I
do.
kid. No, it's interesting because similarly to, let's say, a new hire, for example, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's motivated by something a little bit different, right? Everybody has a
Right.
different mandate that they might be dealing with. Everybody has a different approach that they're trying to address, or a different angle to what it is that they want to share. So there are absolutely going to be times, candidly, where it's very, very easy, where that person or that department or agency has a mandate to get the word out. They want to share that information, and in that case, it's just a question of kind of highlighting why this is the best forum for you to do that and to achieve that goal, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, for the folks who I would say it's a little bit more complicated, it's really about identifying what they're going to get out of it and how they're going to then benefit on the back end, if you will, right? And that can be obviously any number of things, right? If you've got an individual who's, maybe they shared with you that they're not the happiest in their current role, right? That they could
Sure.
potentially give them some visibility so they can find a new position, right?
Oh,
Or if
okay.
there's somebody who's looking for support in a project, right? Then you can kind of highlight some of the other individuals you might have the opportunity to engage with who can kind of help drive that along, those sorts of things. So at the end of the day, on that front, that those understanding how people operate, understanding kind of the psychology behind it a little bit without necessarily getting into psych classes per se,
Yeah.
kind of wrapping your head around those motivators, that is extremely, extremely helpful in driving people, for lack of a better term, to kind of do what you're requesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think one of the other components is that, and I found this specifically, excuse me, within the public sector, is that I found a lot of folks are very voluntarist. They want to share a lot of this information. They want to
Yeah.
get out there because they have many. No, all right, let me put it this way: nobody really goes into the public sector to get rich, right?
No, they do not. That is
Right?
very correct.
No, they
Yeah.
don't.
You don't.
A lot of mission-based work
Right?
there.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so,
Right.
because of that reality, I feel like a lot of folks are much more prone to want to engage on that level, want to communicate the information and the work that they're doing, want to share with, I'll say, the broader public how those initiatives are driving forward. And
Yeah.
because of that volunteerism, I found that it is very, very easy to engage with people, if nothing else, from an understanding, knowledge, learning sort of standpoint.
Right.
And especially when you push position it that way, I think a lot of people kind of want to share that information. So it's been an ongoing learning opportunity for me because I am consistently the stupidest person in the room, and I love it. It is phenomenal.
Oh, I
Phenomenal.
know.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because at my firm, we call that cultural behaviors, right? And it's engaging in, and it's a good segue into sort of a different genre. I won't go too far into it, but building that cultural experience up with, like you said, your constituents and the people you want to influence. We do that at WorldGate with our employees, and we put together these growth mindset behaviors and reactions to how people are going to interact that are tied to mission, but they're also tied to success. Because when you achieve the mission, you achieve the success. Typically, for our firm, that's supporting what you're talking about. So, culture plays a big role if you can look at culture in the way that you just described it. You're describing it as a way to get people to follow what you're doing. And I'm saying it's a way how we do our business. So, it's interesting how you can tie that yes and sort of cultural
Right.
behavior
Yeah.
together,
Yeah. No,
right?
Absolutely.
I think it's a
Yeah.
really good point.
Yeah.
Well, what I love about what you guys are doing anyway is government is one of the most misunderstood industries out there because we only equate government with our experiences, right? So
Mhm.
I don't need, most people have no idea the amount of services that are provided on a day-to-day basis by government because unless you have to interact with those agencies, you don't know. And so we only think
Yeah.
about either from a political front, right? So we think of government and all of the crazy stuff that is out there that none of us, really want to be a part of. And then we've got the other side of it, which is all of the service delivery, because that is what government's purpose is for, right? Is really to serve people. And so we don't always know. And that's what I love about the platform is it gives an opportunity to give a voice to those who really don't, and maybe a greater understanding of some of the amazing stuff that happens out there that wouldn't happen if we didn't have those agencies and those government functions available to the public. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny too how you think about that we rarely we rarely think about government unless things are going wrong, right? We don't
Such a great
on that
point. Yeah.
service
Right.
front, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's when you're having trouble at the DMV that
Yes. It's
yeah,
true. Yeah, it is. No, we only equate with our experience. You're absolutely right. So, well, in your role, you've got to, I'm sure, have a lot of balance around, managing the travel and the relationships and setting all of that up. So, kind of like, well, what's one of your favorite productivity, hacks? Like, how do you keep yourself productive in the environment that you're working in, and like, what kind of approach do you take to managing your day and keeping that balance?
yeah. It's not always easy. It's not always easy, candidly. I still work remotely.
Okay.
So that absolutely comes into play. I don't have
Yeah.
the reality anymore of being face to face in an office, which is unfortunate at times. I do
Yeah.
enjoy that. Um, I'd say that the number one thing that I do is I try as much as possible to plan my week, even above and beyond my day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that there's no wiggle room. That doesn't mean that there's not time to address issues that may arise, in the moment. But I
Right.
try and really kind of structure the key things, the key projects, the key initiatives, the key goals that I want to get done throughout the course of the week as kind of my one, two, and three, right? And that ends up
Yeah.
being my North Star. Everything really drives towards those initiatives. Then there are the kind of secondary things, right, that you need to move along little by little, but maybe that's not necessarily a project that needs to come to fruition for another 6 months, right? And so you kind
Right.
of work on that
Sure.
incrementally, get it a little bit done. Let's move it along, right, and make sure we're hitting those milestones. So that is absolutely one of the key things for me. But I do have to make sure that I'm integrating that time to address those hot button issues that come up, that fire that needs to be put out. Let's make sure we've got
Yeah.
some time on the calendar to do that as well. That's a big
So
one
it's
for me.
interesting to me that
Yeah.
that's awesome, because what I heard in that is goals and objectives, right? So you set the goal for the week, and then you line the activities or the objectives of your week to achieve those goals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah. And a lot of time that gets overlooked, and it becomes a reactionary state for folks. So getting ahead of that weekly is a really good chunk of time, and it's not too far a reach, and it's not too short an
Right.
objective, right? Because an objective is more in the moment, it's got an actionable, task to it, and a goal has got more of a I'm trying to get to this end result.
Yes.
So it's really important that you do that. I find the same thing um, when I don't do it weekly, and necessarily I have a whiteboard and I have all kinds of different places I kind of keep my goals in line. But you got to break it down a little bit and be careful. Don't get too far ahead, right? I used to find myself going, well, what's my 5-year goal? And what's my
Yeah.
10-year goal? And I'm like, holy mackerel, that's a lot of pressure. How about we just chunk it down to a
Yeah,
week, to your point?
Yeah.
Very manageable and digestible, right?
It's so
absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
true.
Yeah.
5 years, maybe, buy a house or something like that, but
Yeah,
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 right.
no, it's so true.
as a
Well,
5 year goal, yeah.
and I think that's part of the problem, right? Is because we overwhelm ourselves then, right? If
Yes.
so,
Mhm.
sometimes it's kind of taking a step back, and to your point, Scott, maybe it's not even like for the week; it's for the day. Like sometimes I find myself stretched so thin, and I'm like, I've got to peel this back and just think, what am I going to get done in the next hour?
Right.
Because
Right.
it's like we get so much going on, and then we become overwhelmed. Then we pretty much shut down. We don't do anything. And I think, it's kind of like taking that step back and also going, okay, it's all right for me to maybe just take a moment and kind of reset and then kind of get focused back in and break things down into digestible chunks. But it's hard to do that sometimes because we're such a instant gratification world that we live in today that, we also think from a productivity and goals and habits, like everything is just going to be instantaneous. Like
Right.
we're just gonna I'm gonna, I was just reading that book, Atomic Habits. It's one that's been around forever, and I've never read it. And I thought, you know what, I see it all the time. I'm gonna actually read this. And there were just some interesting things in there, like where they talk about the fact that you don't, if you want to run a marathon, you don't say I want to run a marathon. You say I want to be a runner. So what steps does it take for me to be a runner? And I can say honestly, in my life, I've never taken that approach. I'm like, I'm going to go do a half
Right.
marathon. I had no idea what it would take to do a half marathon, didn't put any effort into it all. I just have a very strong mental capacity. And so I've done it 3 times now. And then every time you think I'd get smarter and actually do the work necessary to be a runner, but nope, I don't do that. And how much easier my life would be if I would take that approach. But I thought, what an interesting way to put that is that it's not saying,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this activity. It's I want to be whatever the outcome of that activity is, right? And I thought how fascinating that is, because that helped me even kind of in my own brain think about what are the steps necessary then to get to that point. And I think, you
Right.
can learn a lot from taking an approach like that for sure. So
Well, it's interesting you say that, Linda, too, if I may. Goals and objectives have to be met with habit, and
yes,
habit of becoming a runner, habit of what I refer to in my book is peak performance.
yes,
So if I can just take it a step further with you, Alex, I'm sure there's certain things you do to meet your goals and objectives that help you work in peak performance as a habit to maybe how you take care of yourself and get yourself and your mental and physical capacities in line to meet with those objectives and goals. What is, if you believe in that theory, is there things you do that help that?
Well, believe it or not, one of them actually goes back to a point that Linda had just mentioned. And that's really self-care, right? I'm a big believer in
Yeah.
self-care, and I'm also a big believer that eventually you get to the point of diminishing returns, right? If you're
Are you
just
sure you didn't read that? Are you sure you didn't read this?
not yet.
There's an entire chapter on self-care.
Not
There's
just
an
yet.
entire chapter on self-care. You couldn't have said it better.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
Yeah.
The chapter title. Anyway, I'm
I mean,
sorry.
I think it's
Go
really,
ahead.
really important, right? Because I think that we've learned this quite a bit, especially over these last few years with COVID and post-COVID fallout,
Right.
let's say.
Right.
Taking care of yourself, making sure that you're taking that moment that if, you know what, I've kind of lost my train of thought. Let me step away for a minute. I'll go take a
Right.
walk. I'll come back in an hour, right? If you
Yeah.
want to take a nap, do whatever it is
Yeah.
that go have lunch,
Totally.
whatever it is, go take a walk with the dog, take a swim, whatever it is that you need to do to kind of reset yourself, reset your mind so that you can come back with fresh eyes. I think that's the right way to go.
Yeah.
And I try and do that on a daily basis and really kind of bake
Yeah.
in some time to make sure that I'm stepping away for a little while. That has been
100%.
absolutely key for me because I cannot tell you how many times I've been racking my brain trying to find the solution, trying to address whatever the challenge is, and I'm just coming up with crickets. And so, just stepping away, that makes a world of difference. A world of difference. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
that's
I
definitely a
love
key
that.
one for me.
Well, and that, the
Yeah.
funny thing about you saying that is Scott and I were just had, we, on our, one of our other episodes, we were talking with Nick Kittle a little bit about this hustle culture, right, that
Mhm.
we live in. And for those of us who have been around a little bit longer, we definitely grew up in an environment and culture of, you get up in the morning, you sit at your desk, and you're there and you're present, even if you're not doing anything. It's like you're kind of chained to that idea that I've got to be here and I've got to be present, and the idea that I would go in the middle of the day to take a walk because that would actually help me clear my mind and I could be more productive than in that environment was not something that we were raised in. And Nick made a comment about he had heard, some other people, an older generation he was presenting at, who had made a comment like this younger generation, they're just lazy, they don't want to work. And I thought, when he said that, I was wondering how he was going to respond to it. And he said what he told that person is maybe this younger generation is just a little smarter than we are about self-care, about finding the balance, about having that, it isn't all about work. You have to take care of yourself. And, there's that whole balance in all of that. And maybe this generation is just more in tune with that, and that's uncomfortable for us who grew up in an environment where you certainly that's not what you did. You didn't go in the middle of the day and go walk to the park or go do those.
You
This just wasn't
also
okay. So
and you also didn't get the pings and dings and emails and phones and all the
yes,
noise coming at you. So you're not comparing apples to
not at
apples
all.
when you think that way.
No,
The world today is just insane data. It's insane data
it's
share.
true.
So sometimes you just need to take a step
It's
back.
just a
Yeah.
constant. Yeah, no, for
I mean,
sure.
that's a
I
really
love
good.
that you call it
Yeah,
self-care.
Yeah.
And I love that you call it self-care because that has a different connotation, but I think that's the movement, right? Take a minute and inhale is part of the
yeah.
process. Working out, yoga, meditation,
Mhm.
manicures and pedicures, it's all part of self-care if you're recharging.
Yeah.
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 You were going to say, I'm sorry.
I think that that's a really good point because when we were in a more traditional 9 to 5
Yeah.
kind of situation, right? There's a clear delineation between when work starts and when work ends in a lot of
Yes.
ways, right?
Right.
That we don't necessarily have in the more remote environment or in a more hybrid environment.
Yep.
And so stepping away from for an hour when you're in the office can certainly be perceived in a certain way. I think that when you're working from home, especially
Yeah.
where there's the propensity to start a little earlier and end a little later,
Yeah.
I think it's incumbent upon you to take that time. I think you have to, candidly.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
lose all balance if you don't.
And I'm
100%.
glad you said that too, because you're right. In the environment that we're in today, where we are working from home and we have these, we've got our iPhones and our iPads and our watches, and we are constantly connected. And so if you don't learn, especially in a remote environment, like everybody feels like, oh, it's so great that I can work from home. Well, the problem with that is that if you've never worked from home, it is then very hard sometimes to create the separation in
Yes.
here I am during my
Mhm.
work time, and then here I am during my personal family lifetime, and trying to find that balance and all of that, because it's now it all runs together. Because I even think about, many years ago when I would go on vacation, I took my laptop with me, because that's how people would have to get a hold of me. You couldn't really disconnect from that. But now I can't disconnect at all unless I shut it down, right? I've got to turn off my phone. I can't wear my watch or something, because it's in this constant. And so I think the idea of self-care is probably more important today than maybe it ever was, because we're in a information overload time. It's like you're always on, and it's exhausting. I think that's why we're seeing so much burnout and mental health issues and everything. It's like it's just really bubbling to the surface. So
And I think that the thing that's really important takeaway in our conversation today is that you schedule the objective of self-care doesn't mean family time. It literally means recharge
Yeah.
time.
yes,
So you're not going from boundaryless work home life. You're actually importing an hour of you
yeah,
time,
That's right.
right? And if I heard you correctly, Alex, that's what you're trying to do. That's what I do. It's 6 to 7 in the morning. Don't bother
Yeah.
me. I'm doing weights. I'm doing whatever, swimming. I'm doing my morning routine. It doesn't affect anybody else, but it's my time to recharge. So I like to highlight the fact that if our viewers are watching this and thinking, okay, well, I've got to separate my family time. Sometimes families with young kids like mine,
yeah,
when they were younger, and I've got 3 of them, that's just shifting crazy from work to home.
yes.
There has to be a little import of where's my
Little me
massage,
time,
pedicure,
yes.
manicure, workout, eat a slice of pizza and
Sure.
drink a beer
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah, no, it's so
That's
true.
called self-care.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It really is.
no, I
Absolutely.
think
Yeah.
it's a
And
great
bake it into
point.
your schedule. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Well, hey, Alex, we always like to kind of end the show with 3 questions. And so
Sure.
I'm going to ask you what 3 books you'd recommend to our audience, and why those books?
All right. So I've got
Careful how
three
you
in
answer
mind.
this,
Yeah.
Alex. Careful how you answer this.
Yeah, Scott's always
What?
self-promoting, so just ignore him,
I'm not
Alex.
afraid to pitch.
And I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Hey, you've got a podcast. You might as
Yeah.
well, right?
You think he was an entrepreneur that was trying to drive his businesses or something, right? So
I'm just teasing.
It's well done. No,
Teasing
it's
you.
well done. I'm actually really looking forward, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. So I'm not gonna
Thank you.
recommend it just yet,
yeah,
but
yeah,
Okay,
totally.
good.
That's
I
right.
know.
That's fair.
maybe you guys will invite me back down the line, and
We
maybe I can recommend
absolutely
it at
we
that
would
time.
love
Perfect.
to.
I'll look forward to
But
that for
I
sure.
do have a couple in mind, and actually have them here in hand so that I can show everybody the titles and
Yeah.
exactly what they're focused on. So the first one is How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. I doubt you can read it. It's probably backwards. I apologize, folks.
No.
This is
No,
from
it's good.
Christopher Marquis. And it is
Okay.
basically, in a nutshell, it's looking at exploring how and why B corporations, like public sector network, can be a major driver for change in the world. Obviously, we're dealing with a lot of different challenges as a nation. We're dealing with a lot of different challenges as a species. And
Yes.
so, how
Yeah.
B corporations can be a driver and a force for good, if you will.
I like that. That's
Wonderful.
good. Yeah, I will check that one out.
Another one, kind of coming back to some of the points we were discussing earlier about the public sector. This one is by Mitchell Weiss, and it is called We the Possibility.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that one's focusing
Yeah.
on harnessing the dynamism within government, and how public sector institutions can, and I'm paraphrasing, can basically be a force for innovation, to offer
Yeah.
bold solutions to challenges across the world.
I love that. Yeah. No.
Fantastic.
Oh, well, I'll look forward to reading
And
both of
then
those.
this one, I'm probably a little early in recommending this. I just started this actually over the
Yeah.
weekend,
Okay.
but this is one that I'm doing more from a kind of self-growth sort of standpoint, if you
Okay.
will. And this one is called Gender and Our Brains. It's by
Oh,
Gina. I don't
Oh, wow.
know if I'm pronouncing her name, probably Gina Rippon,
okay.
Rippon.
Yeah.
And in a nutshell, this one's kind of looking at questioning our own understanding of gender, binary structures, and kind of what we've learned often from the youngest age
Yeah.
to better comprehend the nuances of human identity, right? And about kind of questioning your own perceptions of the world, questioning your own biases, really trying to kind of challenge and reassess my worldview. So I've just gotten started with this literally probably over the weekend. I think I started on Saturday.
Yeah.
Today is Thursday, so I'm not that far in. I'm only about a chapter and a half in, but
Yeah.
it's been very, very interesting, very intriguing thus far.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm glad it's
Fantastic.
all
Thank
light
you.
reading for you, Alex. Nothing really deep or anything like that. So.
Oh, that's. I'm sure I've got a Batman somewhere hanging out in the background.
No, that's all right.
Well, your growth mindset is super impressive,
Oh,
Alex. And I love your mission-based work and how you bring what you're interested in doing for community and global views to your own sort of capture of self-care and growth mindset. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
Those are great books.
No, I
Thank
I
you.
love it.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
what three other podcasts besides ours would you recommend to the audience, and why those podcasts, if you even listen to podcasts? Because we're finding like some people aren't podcasters, they don't necessarily listen to them, but if you are, what three
Sure.
three do you listen to, and why?
Three that I'll highlight. One is going to be a shameless plug.
Yeah.
Hi, Public Sector Network. Um,
That's all
So
right.
I'm definitely going to recommend the PSN podcast, the Public Sector Network podcast. We do engage, as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of really innovative public sector leaders who are doing some really, really interesting stuff, and really trying to drive society forward. So if anybody has any of the audiences coming from the public sector, has any interest in the public sector, or has any interest in what public sector leaders are doing to hopefully make the world a little bit of a better place for all of us to live in, that's a good one to hone in on.
I love that.
Great.
Another one I'm a big fan of is Freakonomics Radio. It's
Oh,
probably pretty well known as far as
yeah.
podcasts go,
Okay.
but it's kind of strange and unique and has
Yeah.
really interesting topics and falls within that kind of love of economics that I've mentioned that I have
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
And then the third one that I would recommend is an NPR podcast called Code Switch,
Mm.
and it explores race
Oh,
and racial issues and just how central that is to basically every aspect of American life,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
it
Right.
permeates culture and things of that nature. So really, really
See, I'm
interesting
gonna check
podcast
that
as well.
one out. Yeah, no, those are great suggestions
Yeah.
for sure. So what's the one question you wish that we would have asked you, and how would you have answered
Boy, that's a good one. That is a good question.
It's your time to get your message out. Yeah.
I would say that the question that I would have liked to have been posed is, do you have a question for our next guests? So that I could kind of throw that on to the next person, whoever that is, that would be joining you on the podcast.
Yeah.
That would be my question that I would have liked to have been posed by you guys.
Oh, I like that. No, that's really
That's
good.
that's a
Yeah.
great question.
So what
The
question?
second
So
part of
what?
her question was this, how
Yeah.
do
So
you
what
answer
would
that?
you like? What questions should we throw to our next guest? Then what would you want us to ask them?
How are they engaging with the next generation
I like that.
and upcoming leaders? And what are they doing to support their move into the work world, right? How are they kind of giving back to the next generation, if you will?
I love that
Wonderful.
question, Alex. That's a really
I
good
wrote it
one.
down.
Yeah, me too. That's a good one for sure. I like it. No, this is
I
great.
really appreciate that question too, because that's the theme in which Linda, the premise of our whole
Absolutely.
concept here is to try and talk as humans to the next generation or to those that are trying to make a difference where we can help them. It doesn't mean the youth. It could mean people that are ready to take on that challenge.
Yeah.
And so I like that you say, how are they engaging and supporting the next generation is a global, it's not an
Yes.
age group. is
Yeah.
my point.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
really appreciate that.
No.
It's an excellent question for the theme of what we're trying to accomplish. So thank you for
My
I
that.
love
pleasure.
it. Well,
My
Alex,
pleasure.
it
And
has
I'm looking
been
forward to hearing what they have to say.
Oh, me too now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I love it. That is a really good
You just gave us
question.
a season 3 idea now.
Yeah,
Come on.
Love
absolutely.
it.
No,
I
I
love it.
love it. Well, of course, we'd love to have you come back as well
Yeah, please.
Thank
in the
you.
future. It's been so great spending some time with you and getting to learn even a little bit more about you. And I've always enjoyed our conversations. And so thanks so much for being a part of our podcast today.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. Your pearls of wisdom are going to permeate as far as we can
Yeah,
reach.
Well,
absolutely. No.
I really, really appreciate the invitation. Thank you both again for having me. And thank you for having this podcast. Because candidly, there is a lot of insight that you have been sharing in the episodes that I've seen thus far. I think I've seen through episode 4, if I'm not mistaken. Lots of
Great.
pearls, lots of great wisdom and insight to share
Oh,
with folks. So thank you for having
great.
this, because this is really, really great.
Absolutely. No, thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. We'll take it, Alex. So, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll look forward to catching you on our next episode. Thanks so much, Scott, for being here with me again today.
Yeah, thanks, Linda.
Have a
Appreciate
great
it. Thank you
day.
both.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of An Unconventional Guide to Success. If you want to learn more about Alex Chard, you can follow him on LinkedIn. His profile is in the show notes. And to learn more about the Public Sector Network, check out their website at www.publicsectornetwork.com. An Unconventional Guide to Success is an inspirational, motivated series hosted by Scott Montgomery and Linda Misegadis, recorded on Riverside.fm. Music, editing, and production by Logan Misegadis. Check out Scott Montgomery's new book, How Did You Get Here, and all the helpful related materials at www.howdidyougethere.com. Thank you for joining us on our journey. If you would like to reach out to us, our contact information is in the show notes.